Yeah, Peter was he was actually had a Bulgarian background, but he was born in Toronto in 1929. They were not very wealthy, so it was a difficult kind of beginning to his life. He lived through World War II as a teenager, and then he decided to go for a musical career. So he learnt the violin. In 1950, he actually went to London, UK, to find more advanced instruction to progress his playing, and is known as a band leader. From 1955 to 60, I think, yes, he went to Bulgaria to do the same, to Sofia, I think more to develop his Bulgarian cultural side, and that's where he actually met his future wife. And then in 1960, he came back to Canada. He joined I think the Montreal Symphony Orchestra. Finally, I think in the mid 60s, he managed to get an opportunity with the Toronto Symphony Orchestra, which gave him his real working background, and he spent his entire working life with them, and only retired in about 1995. He died in 2023, but he had nearly a 30-year retirement. 2003, the first time I visited after meeting his daughter, until we actually lived in the same house, so we were totally family. I was quite impressed at his business acumen. I think his resistance was okay for the major part of his life. He had no cognitive issues, but then age-related conditions, obviously oncoming dementia and whatever we get as we age, weakens your resistance to this kind of things. So quite honestly, until his 80s, I would say he was very competent with dealing with everyday business transactions. The one I didn't know about at all, it's a commodities fraud. Peter was making online inquiries all over the place, and as a result of them, he used to get telephone calls of people phishing to try and get money out of someone. During the summer of 2022, this person managed to persuade Peter to send them $10,000 US money by wire transfer to buy some wheat futures. Before Peter realized that it wasn't going to be a very good outcome, while still very enthusiastic and persuaded his investment was doing really, really well, this person persuaded Peter to send another 50,000 US dollars, not even Canadian dollars, 50,000 US dollars, which he wire transferred to this person. And then I've managed to recover some emails from this saga, beginning of letting him down gently after handing over his money. They'd also sent a couple of graphs of wheat performance. If it's worth the while, there are people out there who will put together, and they're quite tech savvy, they'll put together very convincing software and literature and infrastructure and payment vehicles and processes and links. Anyone could be fooled. And the final message on September the 27th, where I think the penny must have dropped, Peter said, "Hello, you cleared me out entirely. Thanks for a good lesson. I thought you were trustworthy. Enjoy my money." He realized it had gone. I only overheard a conversation that obviously raised a flag in my mind. I said, "What's this?" And he kind of rolled his eyes, and I could tell he was getting really uncomfortable, and something had happened to him that was regrettable, and I immediately got it. I understood. I think he was embarrassed. The second big event or fiasco was, it started off with Peter receiving a telephone call quite early in the morning of a weekday, claiming to be someone from Amazon, and that they had discovered that he had been overcharged by 149 Canadian dollars for some kind of transaction, and they would reimburse him. So, of course, he agreed to this, and subsequently, they then called him to say that there'd been a mistake, and they'd accidentally given him, they'd transferred to his checking account $49,000, and would he mind taking steps to return this money, please? Now, you would have thought that the first thing to do would be to check one's bank account to confirm this story, which he did, and it appeared that 49,000 had shown up in his checking account, which confirmed the story. But whereas subsequently, after he'd made the wire transfer in our branch, the amount disappeared. But it looked as if someone has gotten into his account online, perhaps through screen sharing apps on his computer, and they'd switched some money around between accounts within his ownership, which I think you can do that if you hack into someone's bank account, but it's much harder to actually extract money from the account. So they were playing a game of smoke and mirrors to convince him that they really had given him this money and he should return it. So he seemed a bit kind of agitated and preoccupied that morning. Apparently they were bullying him, and he said, "Oh, I'm not dressed yet." And someone said, "Well, get dressed and go." And he said, "I haven't brushed my teeth." He said, "Brush your teeth and get in your car and go to your bank and do this." And apparently this is a strategy. And he mentioned it. It didn't really alert me to anything because I wasn't really aware of these Amazon scams. Then later in the morning, he wanted to go to the bank to make a transfer. And I actually took him to the bank, luckily. And I sat there while he was at the counter making this transfer. And I didn't realize, I didn't know what he was doing. I was sitting in the lobby of the bank about 20 feet away from him. Various members of staff, several people, including the teller, were asking him, "Are you sure you want to do this? Is this okay? Please confirm." Well, before they actually agreed to do it, they were very skeptical because of the amount, and they were being cautious, and they probably have guidelines with seniors to be careful. But on the other hand, I could tell by their demeanor that they were very frightened to turn him down flat outright in case they got into trouble, because he was very insistent, and he was quite an imposing person, quite assertive, even in his older years. And I think these young tellers are afraid of offending someone or making a mistake. So they weren't sure, but then finally they seemed to become convinced that it was a legit transaction, and they accepted it. The person on the telephone, and this is a very, very regular strategy they go through from these scam centers, which are overseas. They say they're from Amazon. "We've accidentally sent too much money into your account. Can you send us so many thousand back? And by the way, when you go to your bank and do this wire transfer, they're going to ask you if you know the person that you're sending the money to, and you've got to tell them yes, and you've got to do this, and you've got to do that." So he was obeying their rules. It kind of works. They become submissive. And a strange thing he said to me just after we'd realized it was a scam, he said, I just felt that money in my account that I thought wasn't mine, I just wanted to get rid of it. I wanted to get it back to them. I just felt it was a burden on me. As soon as he'd made the transfer, he turned around and said, let's get out of here. I want to go home. So we got in the car, and we were literally just still almost, I just pulled out of the parking lot and was about to go home. And I was beginning to ask, well, what's this all about? And he actually turned to me and said, "This doesn't smell right." So I said, "Let's go back." So we went back, parked, 2 minutes later, we were back in the bank. I ran in the bank and I ran across the lobby and shouting, "Stop the transaction." And that's at which point they began to try to unravel what had just happened. Story that he was meant to maintain in order to convince the bank staff to carry out his wishes to make an international wire transfer was that he knew this lady in Hong Kong, and he had a name and address and bank number, account number, and he was going to go and visit her. And that's the reason why it was a relationship or a long-standing friendship with this person that he had, which this person I'd never heard of her in my life. And that was supposed to convince the bank staff to carry out his wishes. So Amazon must not be mentioned, or whoever calls you is not to be mentioned. We had been in before to add his daughter onto some of his bank accounts. The purpose of this was one of protection. I believe that they had an idea, that branch had an idea that we were concerned about his security of his finances. The duty manager immediately, to her credit, got involved and called the international department of the bank that handles transfers and tried to get it halted, get the process halted. At which point the person she spoke to told her that it was impossible to reverse the transaction. Then she made a second call. I'm not clear about how much later, whether it was within minutes or it wasn't that long after, but she made a second call, spoke to another person, asked the same question, that could we unravel this transfer. That second person said, yes, I think it's possible, I will try. And from then on, behind the scenes, they were working vigorously to get the process halted and unraveled. And to their credit, they continued to work on this, and finally, after several days, we got a call from the head office that the transaction had been stopped. Luckily, I mean, it didn't upset him that much, which was good for him. It could have really triggered an awful reaction. It was probably shame and embarrassment, because over the years we had often had discussions about business decisions and ideas, and so normally we share any thoughts about what we're going to do financially. I was really surprised that he never told me anything from beginning to end. But it might be, I hate to admit, it could well be that he knew if he mentioned this plan to invest with these people, I would have immediately shot it down. I think his plan was to do something all by himself and show me how well he'd done it. I probably gave him a lot of pretty hard time every time he made a mistake like this. I'd probably be really harsh, to be honest, because mainly I couldn't conceptualize, knowing his history of being fairly savvy and smart in his business dealings from way back. It came as quite a surprise at how innocent and vulnerable he was becoming, and I didn't quite understand why, and I was not very sympathetic. I feel guilty now. I said at the time, "Oh God, you're on the list." You know, you get onto these lists, which these corporations based in all over the world sell to each other. They have these lists of vulnerable people over 60, and they work through them. I'm not saying I'm I'm a genius, but I've been suckered in. Don't let them feel ashamed. I mean, if that happens to a family member, be very sympathetic. Don't say, you know, what the hell were you thinking? Be completely understanding so that you avoid intimidating them and feeling embarrassed.